All right, we're going to have to wrap this up. I don't really understand you because for a newlywed man, you're acting so strange. You told the Duke and the council that Desdemona loves you, so what is making you change your opinion now? Do you doubt her love for you? How wrong can you be? She told everyone in the assembly that she's yours ever faithful. General, I'm telling you true that Iago is the one you ought to doubt, not your bride. I know that you're jealous because you found the handkerchief you gave her and you think she's the one who gave it to Michael Cassio. But for Desdemona, there's no one but you. The stories you told her about your life won her over. You even said she loved you for the dangers you had passed, and you loved her that she did pity them. She even deceived her father Brabantio and eloped with you without his consent. I don't know what more you could ask for. She could have cheated lots of times if she was so inclined, but she just wouldn't do that. The truth is, she followed you from Venice to Cyprus, and in all that time, she was much too busy being faithful to you. Hey, I know that you're jealous, but when it comes to Desdemona's love, you're the only one for her. So rid yourself once and for all of the green-eyed monster, and I'm telling you, Othello, true. There is no one for she, jealous lover, but you. In the 2001 movie Pearl Harbor, Admiral Kimmel delivers my most favorite line saying, "A smart enemy hits you exactly where you think you're safe." That advice is very applicable to Othello, who puts his trust in Iago, a world-class manipulator who in turn exploits that trust by planting the seeds of doubt and jealousy in Othello's mind about his wife Desdemona. So let's take a look at the plot. The play opens with a wealthy but pathetic character named Rodrigo upset when Iago tells him about the recent secret marriage between Desdemona, the daughter of Brabantio, a senator, and Othello, a Moor and the general of the Venetian army. Rodrigo is frustrated because he loves Desdemona and her father denied him his daughter's hand in marriage. Iago hates Othello for naming Michael Cassio as his lieutenant, whom Iago considers a less experienced soldier than himself. Iago tells Rodrigo that he plans to take advantage of Othello for his own purposes and convinces Rodrigo to wake Brabantio and tell him about his daughter's elopement with Othello. Meanwhile, Iago sneaks away to find Othello and warn him that Brabantio is looking for him. An enraged Brabantio confronts Othello, but he finds Othello accompanied by the Duke of Venice's guards who prevent any violence. They all learn that the Turks are going to attack Cyprus, and Othello is sent for to advise the senators. Brabantio accompanies Othello to the Duke's residence and accuses Othello of seducing Desdemona by witchcraft. Othello eloquently defends himself before the Duke of Venice, Brabantio, and the other senators, explaining that while he was a guest of Brabantio's home, Desdemona became enamored of him after hearing the sad and compelling stories he told of his life before Venice, and not by any use of witchcraft. Desdemona confirms that she loves Othello, but Brabantio warns Othello that Desdemona may betray him. Iago takes note of Brabantio's remark. The Duke orders Othello to leave Venice and command the Venetian armies against the invading Turks on the island of Cyprus. Desdemona goes along with Othello and his new lieutenant Cassio, his ancient Iago, and Iago's wife Emilia, who is Desdemona's attendant. The parties arrive in Cyprus and learn that a violent storm has destroyed the Turkish fleet. Othello orders a celebration and leaves with Desdemona to consummate their marriage. Meanwhile, Iago gets Cassio drunk and persuades Rodrigo to draw Cassio into a fight. Montano tries to calm down the angry and drunk Cassio, The two men fight each other, and Montano is injured. Othello arrives and asks what happened. Othello blames Cassio for the disturbance and strips him of his rank. The distraught Cassio tells Iago, who advises him to ask Desdemona to persuade Othello to reinstate him. Using mind games, Iago convinces Othello to be suspicious of Cassio and Desdemona's relationship. When Desdemona drops a handkerchief, the first gift ever given to her by Othello, Emilia finds it and gives it to Iago, not knowing why he wants it. Iago convinces Othello that Desdemona has been unfaithful to him with his captain, and Othello vows to kill Desdemona and Cassio. He also makes Iago his lieutenant. Iago puts the handkerchief in Cassio's lodgings and tells Othello to watch Cassio's reactions while Iago questions him. Iago goads Cassio on to talk about his affair with Bianca, a local strumpet, but whispers her name quietly so that Othello believes the two men are actually talking about Desdemona. Later, Bianca accuses Cassio of giving her a second-hand handkerchief which he received from another lover. Othello sees this, and Iago convinces him that Cassio received the handkerchief from Desdemona. Enraged and hurt, Othello resolves to kill his wife and tells Iago to kill Cassio. Othello shocks all by striking Desdemona in front of visiting Venetian nobles. Meanwhile, Rodrigo is frustrated that he's made no progress, and Iago convinces him to kill Cassio. Rodrigo unsuccessfully attacks Cassio, and Cassio wounds Rodrigo. During the street scuffle, Iago comes from behind and badly cuts Cassio's leg. In the shadows, Iago manages to hide his identity, and when Lodovico and Gratiano hear Cassio's cries for help, Iago joins them. When Cassio identifies Rodrigo as an attacker, Iago secretly stabs Rodrigo to death to prevent him from revealing their plot. Othello confronts a sleeping Desdemona. She denies being unfaithful, but he smothers her in her bed. Emilia arrives and Desdemona defends her husband just before dying. Othello accuses Desdemona of adultery, and Emilia calls for help. Montano, the governor of Cyprus, arrives with Gratiano and Iago. When Othello mentions the handkerchief as proof, Emilia realizes that Iago used it to deceive them. Othello finally realizes that Desdemona was innocent and stabs Iago, superficially wounding him, but not before Iago stabs Emilia to death. Iago refuses to explain his motives, vowing to remain silent from that moment on. Lodovico apprehends Iago for the murders of Rodrigo and Emilia, and Othello must stand trial for Desdemona's death, but he commits suicide by stabbing himself. The play ends with Lodovico appointing Cassio as Othello's successor and tells him to punish Iago justly. Lodovico then denounces Iago for his despicable actions and leaves to tell the state what has happened. When we return, we'll look at some of the remarkable characters in Othello. All right, now let's take a look at some of the major characters in this play. First, we have Othello, who is a highly skilled military general of middle age for the Venetian army. But he's not from Venice. He's a Moor, which is a dark-skinned Muslim of mixed Berber and Arab descent, although Shakespeare never really says where he's from. Iago is Othello's ancient or ensign. Othello trusts him and thinks him honest, even though Iago is a duplicitous manipulator who's out for revenge on Othello because he feels slighted that Othello named someone else to be his lieutenant. Michael Cassio is a loyal and honorable man who Othello picks to be his lieutenant, even though he doesn't have much military experience. Desdemona is the virtuous daughter of a Venetian senator named Brabantio, who elopes with Othello against her father's will. Rodrigo is a gullible nobleman of Venice who loves Desdemona, but Brabantio denied him permission to marry her. Iago manipulates and exploits Rodrigo for money and his own personal gain. And finally, Emilia is both wife of Iago and Desdemona's lady-in-waiting. Emilia sometimes makes outrageous comments when the two women are alone. Nevertheless, she is courageous and loyal to Desdemona. right up to the end of her life. She bears some recognition to Paulina in The Winter's Tale because she's not afraid to tell her lady's husband that he is a fool for doubting her fidelity, despite the fact that her own life could be in danger. When we get back, we'll look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from Othello. All right, now let's take a look at some of the plot devices and memorable scenes from Othello. Although we see the common theme of a father who objects to his daughter's choice in marriage, this is a relatively minor plot device in Othello because it doesn't prevent the couple from getting married. However, one of the most pivotal plot devices in Othello is the handkerchief that he gives Desdemona. Just like Imogen's bracelet in Cymbeline or Portia's ring in The Merchant of Venice, it symbolizes fidelity and trust. Othello goes to great lengths explaining its origin, but it becomes the couple's undoing once it falls into the villainous hands of Iago. He uses it to drive a wedge between the husband and wife and to frame Cassio for having an affair with Desdemona. Not only that, but there's collateral damage to Emilia, who becomes an unknowing accomplice, and Bianca, who thinks Michael Cassio is cheating on her. This is a very visual play, and there's so many memorable scenes to choose from, but I wanted to point out two of Othello's earliest speeches, both of which take place in Act 1, Scene 3. First, he delivers an eloquent speech to the senators, ironically asking them to excuse his poor speaking skills. Listen to this. Most potent, grave, and reverend signors, my very noble and approved masters, that I have taken away this old man's daughter, it is most true. True, I have married her. The very head and front of my offending hath this extent, no more. Rude am I in my speech, and little blessed with the soft phrase of peace, for since these arms of mine had 7 years' pith, till now, some 9 moons wasted, they have used their dearest action in the tented field, and little of this great world can I speak, more than pertains to feats of broil and battle, and therefore little shall I grace my cause in speaking for myself. Yet by your gracious patience I will a round unvarnished tale deliver of my whole course of love, what drugs, what charms, what conjuration, and what mighty magic, for such proceeding I am charged withal, I won his daughter. He then follows up with a beautiful speech to the Senate about just how he came to win Desdemona's heart. Her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me the story of my life, from year to year, the battles, sieges, fortunes that I have passed. I ran it through even from my boyish days to the very moment that he bade me tell it, wherein I spoke of most disastrous chances, of moving accidents by flood and field, of hair-breadth scapes in the imminent deadly breach, of being taken by the insolent foe and sold to slavery, of my redemption thence, and portents in my travels' history, wherein of anters vast and deserts idle, rough quarries, rocks, and hills whose heads touch heaven, it was my hint to speak, such was the process, and of the cannibals that eat each other, the anthropophagi, and men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. These are the legendary creatures known as the blemnies. This to hear would Desdemona seriously incline, but still the house affairs would draw her thence. Whichever she could, with haste dispatch, she'd come again, and with greedy ear devour up my discourse, which I, observing, took once a pliant hour, and found good means to draw from her a prayer of earnest heart, that I would all my pilgrimage dilate, whereof by parcels she had something heard, but not intentively. I did consent, and often did beguile her of her tears, when I did speak of some disastrous stroke that my youth suffered. My story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. She swore in faith 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. She wished she had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. She thanked me and bade me, if I had a friend that loved her, I should teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. Upon this hint I spake. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. This only is the witchcraft I have used. And then the Duke follows it up with an aside saying, I think this tale would win my daughter too. When we get back, we'll look at some of the major themes in Othello. Let's look at some of the major themes in Othello. Virtually every major character is either dissatisfied or disappointed at some point in the play. Rodrigo is disappointed at the very beginning because Desdemona's father won't let him marry her. Iago also starts off disappointed because Othello chooses his less experienced Michael Cassio as his lieutenant over Iago. Brabantio's dissatisfaction stems from his daughters running off and eloping with Othello the Moor. Othello becomes dissatisfied with whether or not he can trust Desdemona because Iago keeps suggesting that she's been unfaithful to him. Michael Cassio is disappointed when Othello strips him of his rank after he gets into a drunken brawl. Desdemona becomes disappointed when she can't figure out why her husband struck her in public and calls her a whore. And Emilia is disappointed in Iago for spreading lies that lead to Desdemona's death. Listen to this conversation that Desdemona and Emilia have in Act 4, Scene 3, when the two of them are discussing why wives are unfaithful to their husbands. Please note, it is a much more mature and intimate conversation between these two close women than we see between Celia and Rosalind in As You Like It. Desdemona begins, "Oh, these men, dost thou in conscience think, tell me, Emilia, that there be women do abuse their husbands in such gross kind? There be some such, no question. Wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world? Why, would not you? No, by this heavenly light. Neither I by this heavenly light. I might do it as well in the dark. Wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world? The world's a huge thing. It's a great price for a small vice. In troth, I think thou wouldst not. In troth, I think I should, and undo it when I had done. Marry, I would not do such a thing for a joint ring, nor for measures of lawn, nor for gowns, petticoats, nor caps, nor any petty exhibition. But for the whole world, why, who would not make her husband a cuckold to make him a monarch? I should venture purgatory for it." Desdemona continues, "Beshrew me if I would do such a wrong for the whole world." Why, the wrong is but a wrong in the world, and having the world for your labor, 'tis a wrong in your own world, and you might quickly make it right. I do not think there is any such woman. Yes, a dozen, and as many to the vantage as would store the world they played for. But I do think it is their husbands' fault if wives do fall. Say that they slack their duties, and pour our treasures into foreign laps, or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us, or say they strike us, or scant our former having in despite. Why, we have galls, and though we have some grace, yet have we some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell, and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. What is it that they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? I think it doth. Is it frailty that thus errs? It is so too. And have not we affections, desires for sport and frailty as men have? Then let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so. Now let's take a look at some of the other themes in the play: jealousy, insecurity, and manipulation. Othello's jealousy has become legendary because of the phrase uttered by Iago in Act 3, Scene 3, which says, "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on." We also see insecurity grab hold of Rodrigo, who doesn't think he's worthy to be with Desdemona. Michael Cassio grows insecure after allowing himself to get drunk and out of control, which cost him his rank in the army. He seems very guilty and sheepish, asking Desdemona to help him get back in Othello's good graces. Desdemona also becomes insecure when she can't figure out why her husband is so angry at her for losing his handkerchief. And of course, no one is more insecure in this play than Othello himself, after Iago keeps planting seeds of doubt in his mind about his wife's infidelity with Michael Cassio. These are most prevalent in Act 3, Scene 3. First, he says he'd rather his wife be unfaithful and not know what was happening. He says to Iago, "Avaunt, be gone, thou hast set me on the rack. I swear 'tis better to be much abused than but to know it a little. What sense had I of her stolen hours of lust? I saw it not, thought it not, it harmed not me. I slept the next night well, was free and merry. I found not Cassio's kisses on her lips. He that is robbed, not wanting what is stolen, let him not know it, and he's not robbed at all. I had been happy if the general camp, pioneers and all, had tasted her sweet body. So I had nothing known. Oh, now forever farewell the tranquil mind, farewell content, farewell the plumed troop, the big wars that make ambition virtue. Oh, farewell, farewell the neighing steed, and the shrill trump, the spirit-stirring drum, the ear-piercing fife, the royal banner, and all quality, pride, pomp, and circumstance of glorious war. And, oh, you mortal engines, whose rude throats the immortal Jove's dead clamors counterfeit, farewell, Othello's occupations gone." Next, he continues, threatening Iago and demanding ocular proof. That's the visual evidence of the affair. "Villain, be sure thou prove my love a whore. Be sure of it. Give me the ocular proof, or by the worth of man's eternal soul, thou hadst been better have been born a dog than answer my waked wrath. Make me to see it, or at least so prove it, that the probation bear no hinge, no loop, to hang a doubt on, or woe upon thy life. If thou dost slander her and torture me, never pray more, abandon all remorse. On horror's head horrors accumulate. Do deeds to make heaven weep, all earth amazed, for nothing canst thou to damnation add greater than that." Incidentally, this exchange is very similar to the warning that Richard Plantagenet delivers to Hubert in the life and death of King John if he was responsible for Arthur's death. When we get back, we'll look at some of the most powerful lines in Othello. Now let's take a look at some of the most powerful lines in this play. Besides the expression, "the green-eyed monster," the second most famous line is in Act 1, Scene 1, when Iago says, "I will wear my heart on my sleeve." Most people use these expressions today, don't even realize that they came from Shakespeare, but there's certainly many more powerful lines in Othello. In Act 5, Scene 2, Othello approaches Desdemona as she sleeps and utters these haunting words as he looks at a candle, and then her. "Put out the light," and then "put out the light." In other words, once he's put out the candle, he can relight it, but once he extinguishes his wife, she's gone forever. Also in Act 5, Scene 2 are the two final exchanges we'll review today. First, Othello confronts Desdemona as he's about to kill her and says, "Have you prayed tonight, Desdemona?" "Ay, my lord." "If you bethink yourself of any crime unreconciled as yet to heaven and grace, solicit for it straight." "Alas, my lord, What do you mean by that? Well, do it, and be brief. I will walk by. I would not kill thy unprepared spirit. No, heaven forfend, I would not kill thy soul. And finally, in the same scene, after Othello discovers that it was Iago's treachery that led him to kill his wife, Othello addresses Iago, looking at him and looking at his feet and saying, I look down towards his feet, but that's a fable. In other words, he considers him a devil and expects to see hooves for feet. If that thou beest the devil, I cannot kill thee. And then he stabs him, but doesn't kill him. Then Othello turns to Michael Cassio and says, Will thou, I pray, demand that demi-devil, why he hath thus ensnared my soul and body? To which Iago gives the unsatisfying answer, Demand me nothing. What you know, you know. From this time forth, I never will speak word. The play ends with no resolution for Othello, nor any of the survivors. They, like us, are left with many unanswered questions that 400 years later, we're still pondering today. When we get back, we'll look at some of the major turning points and correlations in Othello. One of the most important turning points in Othello occurs just before the play begins. This is Othello's rightful decision to select Michael Cassio as his lieutenant over Iago. And while Iago doesn't agree with his selection, as the play unfolds, we can see that Othello was right not to choose Iago. Nevertheless, this was the first catalyst Iago uses to seek his revenge on the general, but it wasn't the only one. He then goes on to comment that he believes Othello has been sleeping with his wife Emilia, which was not true. He also suspects that Cassio may have or will sleep with his wife, which he does not. It's important to note that when someone is as untrustworthy as Iago, they find it very difficult to trust anyone else because they know how deceitful they are. There's a similar correlation in Cymbeline when Giacomo goes to great lengths to convince Posthumus that his wife Imogen has been unfaithful to him. But we understand his motive. First, he wants to take Posthumus down a peg. Second, he wants bragging rights for seducing his wife. And third, he wants his prized ring. But at least in Giacomo's case, he eventually confesses and pleads for mercy without either of the lovers dying. There's another major turning point in Act 3, Scene 3, after Iago agrees to help Othello kill Michael Cassio and Desdemona. Othello says to Iago, Now art thou my lieutenant. Well, if this is truly what Iago wanted in the first place, he could have easily told Othello that he was wrong about Michael Cassio and that Desdemona was indeed faithful to Othello. But Iago is a very complex and evil character who rarely does anything for one reason, except to satisfy his own personal unknown motivations. And we'll see similar horrific behavior from an even more evil character, if you can believe it, named Aaron, when we look at Titus Andronicus. In preparing to do this episode, I found so many interesting facts about the play. Shakespeare's Othello was adapted from the Italian writer known as Cinthio from a story called Un Capitano Moro, which was published in 1565. In reviewing different commentaries about Othello, I noticed that many recent lecturers accuse Shakespeare of writing a racist play about a black man. However, in doing my research, I found this not to be the case. Most of the commentators were using their current political and social motives to come up with that conclusion, either ignoring or being unaware of some important facts about Shakespeare's time. The Moors were a Muslim people of mixed Berber and Arab descent who populated a region of northern Africa during the Middle Ages. In the 8th century, the Moors conquered the Iberian Peninsula, which would now be considered Spain and Portugal. They were driven out of Europe in the 15th century for fear that their Muslim beliefs would threaten a Christian society. One possible explanation for the name Moors may be that they inhabited Mauritania, an area of northern Africa near Morocco. It's important to understand that in Shakespeare's time, Europeans had not yet even developed the concept of race as it's understood today, which makes it difficult for him to have written a racist play when the concept didn't yet exist. Furthermore, in 1550, a Moorish convert to Christianity named Johannes Leo Africanus published a geographical history of Africa. In his book, he attempted to list the traits of African people. His descriptions were neutral, listing both good and bad traits. In the English translation, which Shakespeare most likely read, he described Africans as most honest people, subject to jealousy, proud, high-minded, naive, and addicted to wrath. When you look at Othello, you can see that he demonstrates many of these traits. The author also mentioned that Moors were vulnerable to sleeping sickness, which may explain why Othello suffers from epilepsy. I also wonder what these same critics would have called him had he only written roles for white Christians. Also, remember that Shakespeare painted the dark-skinned Othello as a tragic hero, whereas Iago is the evil, white-skinned monster. And ironically, Shakespeare uses the word honest and honesty in the play approximately 50 times, primarily referring to Iago. It's important to remember that Shakespeare was first and foremost a master dramatist and playwright. He wrote captivating plays for his audiences and magnificent and memorable roles for his acting company. Had he not done so, we wouldn't still be discussing Othello in such depth so many years later, and we would not have seen such incredible actors portray this role, including Paul Robeson, Orson Welles, Laurence Olivier, Richard Burton, John Gielgud, Raoul Julia, James Earl Jones, Lawrence Fishburne, Avery Brooks, and Denzel Washington. By the way, Patrick Stewart played Othello as a white man in an all-black supporting cast production in 1997. In case you were wondering, the anthropophagi mentioned in the first scene are a mythical race of cannibals first mentioned by the ancient Greek author Herodotus, and the men whose heads grow beneath their shoulders refers to a different mythical race known as the Blemmies. And lastly, I started off this episode using a 1958 Frank Sinatra song called Hey Jealous Lover in the opening. Frank Sinatra also recorded another song called Here's to the Losers in 1964, in which the first line goes, "Here's to those who love not wisely, no, not wisely, but too well," which was taken from Othello's final speech in Act 5. When we return, we'll look at some of the great actors in the 1981 BBC version of this play. All right, now let's take a look at some of the remarkable actors in the 1981 BBC Shakespeare version of Othello. Anthony Hopkins, who plays Othello, was selected over James Earl Jones because Hopkins had a British accent, which is ironic because Othello wasn't British or even Venetian. He was most likely from Africa. Bob Hoskins, who plays Iago, is probably best known for his role in Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 1988. Penelope Wilton, who plays Desdemona, also played Regan in King Lear in 1979. Anthony Pedley, who plays Rodrigo, also plays Agrippa in the BBC version of Julius Caesar, Junius Brutus in Coriolanus, Ajax in Troilus and Cressida, and Tranio in The Taming of the Shrew. Rosemary Leach, who plays Amelia, also played the widow of Venice in All's Well That Ends Well in 1981. Tony Steedman, who plays Montano, also played Duke Senior's Lord in As You Like It in 1978, and Aeneas in Troilus and Cressida in 1981. And finally, Terence McGinnity, who plays the second gentleman, also plays Lucianus in Hamlet in 1980, the first gentleman in All's Well That Ends Well, and Servilius in Timon of Athens, both in 1981, and the British captain in Cymbeline in 1982. I also encourage you to watch the 1995 Oliver Parker version, which stars Kenneth Branagh as Iago and Lawrence Fishburne as Othello, and the 1965 Stuart Burge version, which stars Laurence Olivier as Othello, Maggie Smith as Desdemona, and a 27-year-old Derek Jacobi as Michael Cassio. Now, get ready for today's trivia challenge, which is called You Can Say That Again. All right, now it's time for today's trivia challenge called You Could Say That Again. Name the characters who say these repeated words and the plays in which they appear. Number 1, tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. Number 2, kill, 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 kill him. And number 3, the handkerchief. The handkerchief. The handkerchief. When we return, I'll have the answers for you, as well as some relevant lessons from Othello. All right, now let's see how you did on today's trivia challenge called You Could Say That Again. You were to name the characters who say these repeated words and the plays in which they appear. Number 1, tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. That would be Macbeth in Macbeth. Number 2, kill, 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 kill him. That would be the conspirators in Coriolanus. And number 3, the handkerchief. The handkerchief. The handkerchief. That would be Othello in Othello. Now, let's wrap up with some relevant lessons from Othello. First, as human beings, we often react emotionally when we should respond logically. Sometimes you just need to take a deep breath and think things through before reacting. Next, as much as we don't like to admit it, there are con men and con women who look to take advantage of us. Avoid jumping to conclusions, especially in serious matters. Be sure you get your facts straight before you act on a suspicion. And third, the Venetian Senate didn't make Othello their general because he was dark-skinned. They promoted him because of his heroic track record as a skilled military leader and his vast knowledge and experience. When we fail, it's usually because we didn't work hard enough to win. When we succeed, it's usually because we've earned the right to succeed. So don't see being different as a reason for not fitting in, but rather just another way for you to stand out. So remember, you can make excuses or you can make history, but you can't make them both at the same time. I'm Dave Romeo, and thank you for watching this episode of Romeo and Shakespeare. Please join me next time when an illegitimate villain attempts to part two young lovers, and if that weren't enough, you'll see a confirmed bachelor and a sharp-tongued harpy who are destined to fall in love.